Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to RCI TV for round 4 of the Monday British GT Championship. We've returned to Donington Park for the second time this season, and it was lovely and dry on the first occasion where we came for two 30-minute sprint races, but we've returned 2 weeks later for the 90-minute miniature enduro, and the rain has greeted us. My name is Ryan Gill. I'll be your lead host for this evening. We've got Jake Coombs behind the cameras here tonight, and joining me, as he has for the first 3 rounds of the championship, I've got Joshua Devonshire alongside me. How are you doing, Josh?
Absolutely amazing, to be honest, Ryan, and just really excited to be back here at Donington. I think we've got a little bit of a replay here of Boothby, who had a bit of a moment. I think I just saw in the background, but just a little bit. the rain obviously catching people out already, but this is just practice. But no, Ryan, I'm doing absolutely amazing. Thank you very much, and thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's always great to be back, and it's great to be back at such a fantastic circuit. Donington, the only repeat circuit on the calendar. We'll, of course, be heading to Snetterton next week, and then we have the 90-minute finale at Silverstone. So we'll be heading to the home of British motor racing for the season finale, just as the Real World 2019 season did. But we are here for round 4, and of course the rain greeted us. I did say at Brands Hatch that if we didn't have rain, I would make sure that it was a much higher chance of rain for Donington Park, and well, the weather settings have delivered, at least for practice. It's been raining in most of the practice sessions that I've seen leading up over the course of the week. But it's always nice to see it come out here to play. But looking at the weather graphic in the top right, damp out on track at the moment, only light rain and expected to get lighter. We'll have to see how that carries over into qualifying. Meanwhile, though, at the end of practice, it's Leo Hirvonen in the 247 NSX that has found himself at the top of practice. And we have 2 new entries for the GT3 class this evening. Valentin Barrier from the Jardia community team and Cody Pride in the PPR Esports number 33 BMW. Both of them making appearances for the first time in the championship. We realized the GT3 class was getting a bit light on its feet, and they proposed the idea of joining up for the championship, so he said, sure, why not? We'll let Cody Pride and Valentin Barrier come along, and of course, we know these guys are split 1 material. They're split 1 in the Friday championship, and, well, not looking too bad in practice, both of them in the top 5.
No, they've just come straight out the gates with some pretty amazing times, actually. I think Pride and Barry were both topping the leaderboard for the majority of this session. Obviously, now we've got Stilvase and Ruppert and Hirvonen, who... Can I just say Hirvonen's just put a hell of a time in with that NSX. He's really been making it work, and didn't have great luck here in the dry, but maybe the wet might open up some new opportunities, Ryan.
Yeah, Leo Hirvonen, one of the World Tour drivers that we have. And speaking of the World Tour will be racing here on the weekend, on Saturday. We'll be sticking around at Donington Park for round 3 of the World Tour, the 3 hours of Donington Park. But we'll get onto that later on in the race. Meanwhile, we await qualifying as Mike Noble finishes up the session. He switched away from the full fluorescent pink. He's got some nice minty green on that car as well now, mixed in a few other colours as well. But anyway, we're getting on to the qualifying session. 20 minutes. These guys will have to duke it out, but of course it is split. The first 9 minutes dedicated to the GT4 cars, then there's the 2-minute overlap for the GT4s to finish up their lap times, and the final 9 minutes dedicated to the GT3s. But considering the fact that the GT4 class is the bigger class here tonight, and, well, the bigger class it has been for the last couple of races, it's going to be interesting to see how all of these guys do out on track. It's a bit more crowded in the GT4 class than usual.
Yeah, I think finding some clear air is going to be a little bit more of a challenge than it is normally, and the GT4's been fairly bunched up when it comes to the race sessions anyway, so it's going to be really interesting to see what these guys can pull out. Really looking forward to the race itself as well. An hour and a half of these guys just fighting it through, and qualifying still as important as ever, but plenty of time to make up for any discrepancies in grid position.
Yeah, qualifying will be important, but it won't be the most important factor today. There are points on offer for pole position as always, and full points on offer for the race result here today. No half points going on. We'll see those return at Snetterton in a week's time. But of course, 90-minute race here, and obviously we haven't even mentioned the pit strategy that they'll be going through for this race tonight. 2 mandatory pit stops required for everyone here tonight, and the only requirement is that they must change tyres. So going to be interesting to see how all of that takes into effect, especially with the weather, which could change. It's wet at the moment for qualifying. And Mikael Sundstrom will start the first lap of this wet qualifying session for the GT4. So on board we go then for Mikael Sundstrom, part of the nearly on pace team, down towards turn 1, red gate, nice and late on the brakes, turning in very, very early. Don't clip the inside on the Astro, unsettle the car, go as wide as you can on the exit, and now through Hollywood and the Craner curves. We're going to go on to the splitter cam. Fantastic sense of speed here as Mikael using as much of the curve as he can, brakes early for the old hairpin, get the car turned in, maximize the exit as much as you can. Obviously, in these kind of conditions, maybe you want to avoid that curve a bit more than usual, through past Starkey's Bridge, up through the Schwantz curve, and then on to McLean's. Nice and tight here, don't quite hit the inside of that curve, there is a bump, maximizing the exit for McLean's as well. Heads up to Coppice, the blind right-hander, got to be nice and early on the brakes, get the car turned in really, really sharp, and then get the power down as quick as possible. Onto the back straight, heading towards the final sector of the circuit now. On Starkey Straight, he'll make his way towards the Fogarty S's. Nice and late on the brakes here. Cut as much of the chicane as you can on the entry and on the exit as well. Mikael Sundstrom looking like he's doing a good job there. Lap time is still valid. Nice and late on the brakes here for the Melbourne loop. Get the car turned in early on the power as well. Looking very good from Mikael Sundstrom at this point in time. Up towards the final corner, very similar to the Melbourne loop. Goddard's. You just got to be a bit careful here. Circuit starts to dip down with some elevation change, but nice and early on the power as well. Mikael Sundstrom powers down towards the line, and the first lap of the session, it's a 141.3 for Mikael Sundstrom, and if we reference that to practice, 139.0 was the quickest time, but the conditions were fairly different. They were much better in practice. As we see some more cars come over the line. It's only Charlie Crossland that can beat Mikael Sundstrom's initial lap time, but he will beat it by almost half a second. So then Matt Samuel in second.
Yeah, it's a really clean lap from Sundstrom, but obviously just maybe not quite the pace that he'd have really liked. But there's still 5 minutes or so left of the GT4 qualifying, and not everyone has actually completed a lap yet. As we're seeing Noble. Obviously, Noble was very strong here in the drive when we first came here, so he's kind of going to be the one to watch, I think, in qualifying. Is he just finishing his out lap, or is he finishing his first lap? But we're about to find out. Looks like he's just starting his out lap now, so he's going to be one to watch for absolutely certain. But currently, we do have Charlie Crossland currently in provisional pole.
Yeah, Mike Noble did very, very well in the first race at Donington Park. Didn't do so well in the second race. Obviously encountered hardware issues with his wheel, lost force feedback. And of course that caused him to retire from the race. Was having a good time out at Brands Hatch until he caused a collision with a car ahead, and that gifted a potential podium place that Mike Noble was trying to compete for to Harry Conway instead. So Mike Noble, he's impressed in the 2 races, but obviously if you don't know who Mike Noble is at this point in time, you've probably been living under a rock in terms of ACC community racing. One of the fastest guys around. Here's another one of the fastest guys around. James Parker for Coach Dave Academy comes across the line. He's half a second off, but goes provisional 3rd, but will be immediately demoted to 4th as the Ginetta of Tiago Lima now goes provisional pole, 75 thousandths ahead of the likes of Charlie Crossland, who will cross the line. Doesn't seem to improve, but Cormac Ryan Meenan in the Porsche will throw himself onto the front row of the grid for now.
Yeah, the top 3 provisionals so tightly bunched together, less than a 1/10 of a second, which is kind of crazy. Obviously, you have Panker has also just gone P4 as well, and he's only 2/10 behind Tiago Lima. But given the conditions, that was a crazy lap that Thiago has just put in. Obviously, Mike Noble again, as we were just discussing, goes almost 2/10 faster still, taking provisional pole away from Thiago Lima. And given the conditions, seems like a pretty solid lap.
Yeah, 140.5 is very, very quick in these kind of conditions, and the weather does not seem to be changing throughout the entire qualifying session. It will be like this for the GT3s as well. Not too much longer left for the GT4 qualifying session.
It's also worth noting, Ryan, that he's actually 4/10 up on his best time right now as well. So if he can make this stick, that could be a great time.
Yeah, Mike Noble doing very, very well. The Alpine, it is a very well-planted car. It does kind of like these conditions, judging from what I've seen. The Ginetta also kind of likes these wet conditions as well. The lack of traction that the car has isn't as obvious in the wet conditions. Very much similar to the Aston Martin V8 from the GT3 class in that respect. Here's Martin Lawrence, though. Was the early championship leader in the first couple of rounds. Not leading the championship at this point in time. We'll show you those standings later on before the race gets started. But Martin Lawrence sitting 6th place at the moment, 0.6 of a second off provisional pole. He's up by almost 0.4 of a second as well. So he's going quick at the moment, enough to potentially put him on the front row of the grid. Cormac Ryan Meenan, though, will take provisional pole, 140.2, pending Mike Noble, of course, crossing the line and taking that away. Here comes the Alpine through the final corner, up towards the timing line now, up by 0.4, will go clear by 1/10 of a second for provisional pole. Cormac back in the pit lane. That'll be his qualifying session done. James Parker 3rd, Charlie Crossland 4th. And where is Martin Lawrence in all of this? Did he improve? I believe he did. He's up to 5th.
I wouldn't discount James Parker either. James Parker is currently green on his Delta as well, and he's not that far behind, only 0.3. Anything can happen, especially if he can take second from Ryan Meenan. He'd be looking to do that, especially given his race last week at Brands.
Yeah, James Parker. He retook the lead in the championship for the Friday championship in fantastic style. And now he's going to be looking to take the lead of the GT4 championship, or the GT4 class in the British GT championship. Will cross the line, has enough time to finish this lap. He started before the end of the GT4 session. It has officially ended now, so all of the GT4s are now on their final laps. Can James Parker, can he pull it out of the bag on the final lap for the GT4 session? We've seen some drivers do this a couple of times this season across multiple different championships, but now it's time for them to come out and do it on track. Can James Parker do it? The 888 BMW, he's looked fantastic in a lot of races so far this season and been driving that car very, very well. He's the only M4 on the grid. Not really that much of a popular car pick, but it has been resurgence in popularity lately. Up he goes then, and will make his way towards the final sector. Only up. Well, actually, I was going to say he was up by just under 1/10 of a second. He's now slightly down on his Delta. And that's not a great showing. Jarkko Torvinen up on his time, by the way, as well. He's only up by 1/10 of a second. James Parker comes through the foggy S's, and that's it. He's lost it. And that's going to have to be it. 3rd place is the best that James Parker will manage. Martin Lawrence, by the way, I think he's just going to make his way back to the pit lane, because I think he started his lap after the 11-minute mark, because I believe it was James Parker that was the last one to start. So Martin Lawrence will most likely have to abort this lap, but there you go then. Mike Noble, he takes pole position in the GT4 class. Cormac Ryan Meenan will line up beside him on the front row of the grid, and James Parker and Charlie Crossland, the championship leader, will find himself on the 2nd row of the grid. The GT3 class championship leader makes his way down towards the end of pit lane, lining up in an orderly fashion. All of these guys focusing on track position rather than tyre temperature for their qualifying. And 9 minutes officially underway for the GT3 class. Svenček will be the first out on the circuit. And the 107 Bentley will most likely be the first one to start a flying lap of this session, unless he's going to let Valentin Barrier through right here, right now. But as it stands, the Bentley first out on track, and it's going to be interesting to see how all of this goes, as Valentin Barrier looks quite eager to get past the Bentley and get this session underway.
Oh yeah, we haven't even reached the race session yet, but I think Svenchek is just going to let Barrier through. There's no point in really racing and qualifying, especially on the outlap as well. So it looks like Barrier is going to be the first flying lap we see for the GT3s, and he's looking very, very quick in practice. So obviously new to the championship. This is his first round, as much as it is also Pride's as well. So let's keep an eye on these guys and see where they come out. But let's not discount Boothby either. He's been very quick, very consistent all championship, and I don't think he's going to let this one go easily.
No, definitely not. And here's the championship leader, George Boothby, you just saw on your screen. He's making his way past Leo Hirvonen on the outlap as well. But here we go, Valentin Barrier getting ready. The GT3 session about to get started. We'll go on board with the Ferrari, and we'll get a lovely view of Donington Park at full speed in the wet here with the 488 Ferrari GT3 Evo. So here we go, across the line then. Valentin Barrier starts the lap down towards turn 1, Redgate, nice and late on the brakes, getting the car turned in really, really early. Slipping out on the exit though, catching some of the grass. Valentin Barrier, that's a big mistake coming into the first corner. That'll have compromised his lap time. But I believe the lap time will still be valid. Hasn't gone wide enough. Comes into the old hairpin now. Fighting that car, it would seem, under acceleration. Maybe just running the TC a bit too low for these conditions, but maybe that's how he likes it. Maybe this is the plan for Valentin Barrier in qualifying. George Boothby is off track, by the way. Yellow flag in Sector 2. So the championship leader has had an issue on his first flying lap. We'll follow through with Valentin Barrier as he goes through Coppice and now makes his way on to Starkey straight towards the final sector. It's been a bit of a scruffy lap for the number 72, but I suppose any banker lap is better than no banker lap. Into the foggy S as he goes. Doesn't cut the corner and continues on as is. Makes his way down towards the Melbourne loop. Nice and late on the brakes. Get the car turned in very, very early. Get the power down early as well. Maximize the exit. And then make your way up towards Goddard's for the final corner. Nice and late on the brakes here as well. Get the car turned in early. Hug as much of the inside as you can. Early on the power. Wide on the exit. Here comes Valentin Barrier. The first lap time for the GT3 session. It's a 1:33.5 for Valentin Barrier. Svenchek can only go 1.4 off of that, but Leo Hirvonen in fantastic style, 0.8 quicker, and I said that lap for Barrier looks scrappy. It wasn't just him that had a scrappy lap as well. Andy Boardman and Svenchek also struggling, but Hirvonen and Steele Vason leading the charge at the moment.
Obviously, names we've seen at the top in previous races as well. Googly currently in P6 in the Jag as well, which is, I think so far, I say so far his best finish, but at the moment he is last in the GT3s. As the others are still yet to set a time. But no, Steele Vason, just coming in with just a great time. And Peter Hrobar coming around Goddard's now, last turn, and about to set, it's probably going to be his first lap, and that's going to put him in P5, so that's putting him in really, really good stead to to kind of just get the banker down and try and improve on that.
Peter Hrobar, who was disqualified from qualifying last week, if you remember, for going out during the overlap period. He was forced to start behind the GT4 field, not making that same mistake this week. Meanwhile, here's Jaroslav Honzik. He's a popular guy around the sim racing community. Not sure if you've heard of him before, Josh, but he's making his way out onto his first flying lap as well, showing up a bit late. But unlike round 2, he is actually going to get out there and set a qualifying lap time by the looks of it, assuming he doesn't invalidate his lap, which is always possible, but Jardier looking good for the moment. And we'll await to see what the number 39 can do. Leo Hirvonen, by the way, retakes that provisional pole, but it's immediately stolen back by Steele Vason. The Honda and the Aston Martin trading places for that provisional pole position, only 27 thousandths in it.
It's so close, and there's still time to do another lap, maybe 2 at a push. And obviously, Cody Pride, he was very quick in practice. What's he going to come out with? I don't think he is. That's going to be either an outlap or an invalidation by the looks of things, but still another lap. So we've got some really quick guys here. We've obviously got Jardier, we've got Boothby, and Pride and Rupp were all very quick in practice as well, and they've all yet to set a lap time. So where Steel Basin's put a really, really good job in, I think that first place is in danger.
Definitely is in danger, and it's going to be in danger from more than just Leo Hirvonen. Valentin Barrier is 0.4 of a second up on his lap time. George Boothby, with his first valid lap of the qualifying session, will go 4th. And Jardier, he'll go 5th, 0.7 off the provisional pole lap time, though. I did say Valentin Barrier was up on his time. He comes through the final corner, and he's gained a massive amount of time coming out of the final corner. This is going to be provisional pole. Look at that. 132.190 for Valentin Barrier. Hirvonen will cross the line 12 thousandths off of Barrier's lap time. It's so close, and Steel Basin is improving as well. He comes up, it's 21 thousandths, separating the top 3 with 2 minutes to go in qualifying.
Donington once again not disappointing. Googlia crossing the line now and doesn't improve on their time at all. But those top 3, what a gap! What a difference between the provisional top 3 right now, as we see Pride finally putting in that time, stealing P4 from Boothby. Rupert as well, about to cross the line as well. And that will only be good enough for P8, a full second behind Barrier. That's a put into some perspective, it's just how quick that lap was. But
that's a bit disappointing for Rupert as well. He was P2 in practice, by the way, so it's a bit of a kick for him. He does still have time to improve, of course, and George Boothby, he's improving, of course, and up he goes. He'll put himself just under 0.2 within that provisional pole time, but the championship leader not looking like he has the pace at this point in time.
No, I don't think he's going to be able to just run away with this one. And maybe it depends on the race conditions. Maybe just the McLaren just isn't that great here in the wet. But we'll have to see. Qualifying is one thing, but the race is another thing entirely. But you see Andy Boardman about to finish his lap as well. And it's going to be good enough to move up into P6 and steal that from Jardier. But Jardier's still got time to finish another lap. Still Basin, still in P3, and this is just making me even more excited for the race. Ryan, it's been a while since we've seen something this close. Googly is going to put that Jag into P10, taking that from Svenchek. Pride about to finish another lap, and it's not quite going to be good enough to put him up anywhere. Boothby still in P4, Pride in P5, so things seem to be stabilizing out as qualifying is coming to a close.
Rupert up into 6th place. Meanwhile, on the timing sheets, Leo Hirvonen and Steel Basin both improving. Valentin Barrier has invalidated his lap, and that looks like it will be the end of Valentin Barrier's qualifying session. Yep, he's parked on the side of the track. Here's Leo Hirvonen, though. 3rd place at this point in time as George Boothby goes provisional pole. 66 thousandths of a second. I said he didn't look like he had the pace. He's proved me wrong right there and then when it mattered coming across the line. I think he even has enough time to go out and do another lap. But here comes Leo Hirvonen. He's up on his time as well. All he's got to do is beat 78 thousandths of a second. And you know what, Josh? I think he's going to do it.
I think he's got it, Ryan.
3.5 tenths up. There it is.
What
31.8. And Steel Basin's made a mistake in the final corner, and that's compromised him. He was up on his time. And we're going to get a little bit of a replay here. He was a 10th up on his time. He could have thrown himself onto the front row, just got out of shape. And that's the end of his qualifying session as well. But Leo Hirvonen right at the end, and unless George Boothby has a reply, Leo Hirvonen has thrown the NSX on pole in fantastic style at the end here at Donington Park.
Yeah, Boothby just invalidated his lap as well. He just obviously we see him spinning now, but no, it looks like Hervnen has got this one, and that makes me really happy to see. He's been pushing that car so hard all season, and finally kind of getting the result that yeah, I think he deserves this one, Ryan. I think you got to hand it to him.
Well, Leo Hirvonen, he was on the front row of the grid, if I remember, for the first round at Alton Park. The first race didn't really go his way. The second race went a bit better for him and ended up on the podium. Since then, he's found it quite hard to get back up into the top three. But I tell you what, he's done it in fantastic style here. Here are the qualifying results, by the way. Leo Hirvonen on provisional pole. Of course, George Boothby alongside him, championship leader, putting himself in a good position for the start of this race. Valentin Barrier and Steele Vason on the second row, with Rupert and Pride on the third row. Boardman lines up alongside Jaroslav Honzik, with Peter Hrobart and Alexander Guglia rounding out the top 10. Svenček finds himself alone on the back row of the GT3s. As for the GT4s, Mike Noble will line up with Cormac Ryan Meenan alongside them. James Parker has Charlie Crossland, the championship leader for the GT4 class for company. Martin Lawrence and Thiago Lima will field out the third row of the grid. Matt Samuel has Killian Ryan Meenan alongside him. Alan Garland and Gergo Panka will finish out the top 10 for the GT4 class. And the rest of the GT4 grid, well, it's Jarkko Torvinen in the Ginetta, Mikael Sundström in the Mercedes, and then it's a double back row of Camaros with Andre Felix and William Stephenson to round out the 14 GT4 cars in the field tonight.
Yeah, I think we saw this last time we were at Donington as well, Ryan. There's just the Camaros just seem to struggle around here, and I don't know if it's a testament to the car or if Lawrence's performance is a testament just to how good of a driver he actually is. Just kind of hurling that Camaro fairly far up the grid for the GT4s. But no, we had a really close qualifying, and I think the race is going to be even tighter, Ryan. Just starting the session now, and it looks like we're starting off wet, but looking at the forecast, rain should start easing off, so strategy's got to come into this one as well.
Definitely so. And as we wait for the grid to form, we're going to have a little look at the championship standings tonight coming into this race. So, of course, George Boothby, he leads the championship in the GT3 class, 184 points for the 666 McLaren. He's followed by Milton Steele-Vason on 159 points, David Kovacs on 143, with Ryan McIntosh, who's unfortunately had to sign out of the championship in 4th place. Then it's the likes of Leo Hirvonen and Jakim Stanazis, Juraj Svenček, Alexander Guglia, and Wojciech Lukaszek round out the top 10. Moving on to the second page, we have the likes of Andy Boardman with Peter Hrobart, Archibald Toth, Jaroslav Honzik, Barnabas Eros, and then, of course, 2 newcomers with Cody Pride and Valentin Barrier. Vasily Anufriev, unfortunately, no longer in the championship. He hasn't been able to attend any of the 3 rounds prior to tonight.
That is a shame, but we've still got some very, very strong drivers here, and I don't think they're going to disappoint us. So, leaving it a little bit later than usual, Ryan, but still going to ask the question: what's your predictions for this one round?
Well, we'll get onto that in just a moment, Josh. Just to go over the GT4 standings quickly for people at home as well.
Oh, sorry.
We have Charlie Crossland in the lead. He's also on 184 points, with the likes of George Boothby keeping the championship leaders in close company. James Parker on 163. He's going to be looking to try and retake the lead of the championship here tonight, but he's got a big job on his hands. Martin Lawrence in 3rd, and Harry Conway, who's not present tonight, 4th in the championship. The first of the Ryan Meenan brothers, Killian, finds himself in 5th. Thiago Lima in 6th, Gergo Panka 7th, Alan Garland 8th, Mike Noble 9th, and Jarkko Torvinen rounds out the top 10. Mikael Sundström, Cormac Ryan Meenan, Matt Samuel, Andre Felix, and William Stephenson round out the GT4 standings. So 15 GT4 cars in total left in the championship. Harry Conway unfortunately signed out for tonight, so we've only got 14 present on track. but still plenty of action to come forward. And, well, quite eager to get into it, Josh, and predictions time it is, I guess, as the grid have lined up. They've just got about 2 minutes before the formation lap begins, and the one thing I'm noticing, looking at the weather report right now, is that it's starting in light rain, and it's expected to get lighter over the next half an hour, so we could possibly see a transition of wet to dry here at Donington Park today, and well, that's going to play into the pit strategy of 2 mandatory pit stops that we have here this evening for this 90-minute race. 2 tyre changes required, so that could be crucial in deciding how your pit strategy goes. Obviously, you want to make those pit stops when the weather changes, if it is going to change, if it's going to go dry. You're going to want to make sure that you're only realistically switching over onto dry tyres. You don't want to switch onto some wets and then switch onto dries if it's going to compromise you and cost you some time. So it's going to be interesting to see who's my bid for GT3. It's got to be the championship leader, George Boothby.
I think I'm going to throw a wild card out there. I think if Hirvonen can hold off in the wet, because that NSX seems very, very strong in these weather conditions. I think if Hirvonen could hold off Boothby for just a few laps, maybe, hopefully, if what we've seen in qualifying is anything to go by, start pulling a little bit of a lead. I do think Boothby will start to catch up in the closing stages of the race, though. But this is the fun. You can never tell. We can bang about predictions all day long, but we can never actually tell until it happens.
That's absolutely true. If predictions is anything to go by, they can be as accurate or as inaccurate as you like. But here we go then. 10 seconds, just under, until Leo Hirvonen pulls the NSX off the front row of the grid. He will be the pace setter for the formation lap here today. 90 minutes on offer for all of you guys this evening. It's the first of 2 90-minute races we have this season. Of course, we'll see the 2 30-minute sprint races return next week for Snetterton. Will be great to go out to Snetterton as well. And then, of course, we'll finish at Silverstone, a 90-minute miniature enduro as well. Other stuff coming up this week. We've got Imola for the Diamond Drive Cup on Wednesday. Then on Friday, it's going to be Misano, 2 30-minute sprint races, and then we're back at Donington Park on Saturday. No Night Owl going on the Saturday, and that's because the World Tour returns with round 3, the 3 hours of Donington Park. And that's going to be a really exciting race on the weekend as well. That one starts in the dark and will transition into the morning sunlight. So that's going to be super, super exciting to see on the weekend. I'll be commentating that. And I'm not sure if it's 100% confirmed who's going to be alongside me for commentary in that race, but plenty of teams taking part, and it's going to be so, so exciting to see the World Tour storyline continue on from the 24 hours of Kyalami that we held just under a month ago.
Yeah, it's absolutely gripping stuff. Just most days of the week, there's all sorts of racing happening at all skill levels, and obviously we're here to bring you pretty much all the best we can, and that's no different to tonight as we're watching Hirvonen. Almost, I see Boothby's actually getting a little bit aggressive trying to get by, but I don't blame him. He'll be able to try and jump that NSX as soon as he can, and it's just really exciting, Rang. I'm not gonna lie.
Well, we have Papa Boothby in the chat, and he said, "Don't bet on George. His prep has been non-existent today." And if that's taught me anything, the less preparation, the better. Or at least it seems that way for myself. Every time I seem to prepare a lot for a race, I seem to do terrible. And then when I show up last minute, it doesn't turn out that bad. And I know quite a few esports drivers and aliens that have that similar kind of methodology. I'm pretty sure Jardia never practices a day in his life. And he still manages to find himself in contention a lot of the time. But here we go then. They start to line up 2 by 2 as far as the eye can see. 25 cars on track this evening, 11 GT3s, 14 GT4s. And we get ready for 90 minutes of racing around here at Donington Park. It's going to start wet. Will it finish dry? We don't know. Who will be the winner? It could be anyone on this grid. The story's yet to be written. We come up towards the line here. A few people a bit out of sorts, it seems, as we go green for the start of 90 minutes of racing here at Donington Park. And it looks like a very good start from Valentin Barrier, who was getting close alongside George Boothby, but Boothby not going to allow it through. And George Boothby will take that second place. And look at Steele Vason on the outside of Valentin Barrier. He's going to go through as well, says thank you very much. And he'll make his way up into the podium places early on. Cody Pride looks like he's having some trouble with the likes of Andy Boardman early on in the race as well. But it looks all fairly clean throughout the grid so far.
Absolutely. I think Steele Vason just got past Barrier whilst he got a bit too close to the back of Boothby. Had to back out and just... Steele Vason just taking advantage of that. And he's caught right up to the back of Boothby as well. Hervenen pulling a little bit of a gap, but... It's still very early stage of the first lap even. So let's just see where the cars actually start to sort of dissipate and kind of settle into the rhythm. And it looks like we've got Ruppert in the background thinking about making a move on Barrier as well. Thinks better of it. And still Vason looks like he might just be getting a slightly better exit than Boothby. But back to the GT4 group, and we have Mike Noble still leading the GT4s with Cormac Ryan Meenan just hot on his heels.
Big change for GT3. Steele Vason has got past the likes of George Boothby. That happened into the Melbourne Loop. And Steele Vason, one of the contenders for the championship. Kovac's not present tonight, which means Steele Vason is realistically George Boothby's only contender for the championship. He's managed to get ahead of the 666 before the end of the first lap. So Steele Vason, he's throwing his gauntlet down, saying, look, if you're not going to get a move on, I'm going to get past, and I'm going to look at that NSX up the road and start to catch it down. Meanwhile, Jardier, he finds himself now in 8th position as Cody Pride has got past him, but Leo Hervenen up at the front, 1.5 second gap after the first lap of the race. The NSX flying in these conditions.
Yeah, it seems like it definitely favours it, but don't discount Steele Vason. He is chewing into that gap. I think he just got a bit held up behind Boothby, but we're only on the second lap. But look at the distance between the NSX and the rest of the field. Hervenen is not hanging around. He has the advantage, he has the lead, and he doesn't want to relinquish that. He's not going to hand it over. Felix Ruppert under pressure from Andy Boardman. It might be an opportunity for a move going down the straight, but might be a little bit ambitious. I don't think anything is going to happen as we're rising on the back of Ruppert's wing. And I think he's just going to be trying to catch up to the Ferrari in front. But then Barrier will also be looking to get past Boothby as well.
Whoa, was there contact there? I think Cody Pride might have had a bit of contact with Andy Boardman, the number 69. We'll get a replay of that, courtesy of Jake Coombs. Does this camera angle tell us the full story? The BMW braking late. Oh, yes, that's contact. Yeah. And Boardman loses a place. Well, he loses 2 places, technically, because of that. So that's not going to go down too well with Andy Boardman. And the live stewards here today, they're, of course, watching over everything, making sure everyone's behaving themselves. And Jardier's got past the likes of Cody Pride now after that as well. So the steward's going to be looking into that incident, I'm sure. Meanwhile, in the GT4 class, all still close together at this point in time. Mike Noble not clearing off into the distance. Cormac Ryan Meenan, James Parker and Charlie Crossland all keeping in touch.
Absolutely. And it looks like Cormac is still quite close to the Alpine as well, as we see Thiago Lima. Obviously, he's still very quick in qualifying as well. Was provisional pole sitter at one point in time by a fair margin. Just seemingly maybe struggling to catch up to Samuel actually a little bit.
Yeah, Thiago Lima, who did very, very well at Alton Park in the first round, has struggled in a couple of the other rounds as such. The Ginetta doesn't really go the best around here at Donington Park, and Jarkko Torvinen knows that just as well as anyone. He struggled immensely here in the 2 30-minute sprint races, and Killian Ryan Meenan, he wants to get past. He was subject to a rather amusing incident at James Parker's expense earlier on in the season, and Killian thinks better of it coming into the Foggy S's, and now he's going to have to defend. Meanwhile, Andy Boardman, he's looking to make his way back past the BMW. The stewards have also given a 15-second time penalty to Cody Pride. That will be most likely for the incident with Andy Boardman, which has caused the Aston Martin to be behind the BMW. And I mean, considering the fact that Boardman lost 2 places, position wasn't returned, it's probably fair game, I would say.
Yeah, I don't really think there's much contesting that. I mean, we all saw what happened, and if that wasn't bad enough for Pride, he almost loses it going down into the going down the Craners as well. So not a great not a great opening of the race for Pride, but still plenty of time to pull it back. 15 seconds in the grand scheme of things can be made up. You know, cars in front can make mistakes, they can get locked into battles, and let's not discount traffic as well. An hour and a half, I think we're going to be seeing a fair bit of that.
Well, interesting development. The track has just turned damp. It was wet at the start of this race. The track is now damp. It is starting to dry out. The rain is lightening by the minute, it would seem. Still on course to be raining in about 30 minutes time, but it is getting lighter and the track is starting to dry out slightly. So that's going to be interesting to see how that changes the pace of all of these cars. Of course, it'll affect them massively, going from wet conditions to damp, and then of course potentially dry as well. Here's Mike Noble, by the way, still leading from Cormac, Ryan Meenan and James Parker in behind. And Mike Noble not pulling away like he did in race 1 at Donington Park 2 weeks ago. He's got the entire GT4 field on his toes. Cormac, slightly slow exit from the Melbourne loop. The Porsche just getting a bit out of hand. Here's James Parker, but Cormac very well defended. Makes him go to the outside. Here comes Charlie Crossland, though, from a mile back on James Parker, and he makes it stick. Slight bit of contact between the Aston and the BMW, but look at the pace of the BMW now. Breezes back and will take that 3rd place. So James Parker retains that 3rd place, but Charlie Crossland, demon on the brakes into the final corner.
He just saw a gap opening and just decided, well, that's about the same amount of space as it would take for an Aston Martin, and just went for it. And that has just helped him close the gap completely as well. Pride taking an early pit stop, obviously serving the penalty as well. I wonder if something has actually happened, or whether or not he's making the early switch to dries, considering the conditions. Valentin Barrier behind Felix Ruppert. I mean, that's also a change and a bit of a development. Pride taking the first of his pit stops, enters the pit lane now. He hasn't retired the car, so puts him at the back of the GT3s, but a pit stop ahead, and gets that penalty over and done with and out of the way. So if he just gets his head down, anything can happen. He was quick in practice, and Svenček right on the back of Guglia. Guglia just about keeping the Jaguar ahead. Frobar not far up the road either. Going down into T1, it looks like Svenček is going to get the inside line. It looks like he's going to go for a move, has to back out, but very, very well done avoiding contact as well.
I can confirm that Cody Pride is not on dry tyres. He's still on wet tyres, but he has got one of his mandatory pit stops out of the way. I wonder if that's a strategic decision to get himself in clear air at this moment in time. Maybe thinks that he's going to be held up a bit in the spray of some other cars and finding it a bit difficult to overtake around here. So, you know, everyone needs to make those pit stops, and maybe he's got the confidence to say, well, look, if it changes to dries, I'll get the timing correct and everything will go my way. It'll be interesting to see how all that develops for Cody Pride over the course of the race. Meanwhile, we watch Alan Garland at this point in time being chased down by William Stephenson. He's got Gogo Panka just in front of him, and Mikael Sundstrom behind them as well. Leo Hervenen still leads, by the way. The gap 1.6 seconds. It seems to have stabilized itself, but George Boothby 3.2 back. You can see him there starting to lose time to the two ahead.
Yeah, it's very unusual to see Boothby just falling back like this, but at the same time, that could also be partially the conditions. Jardier catching right up to the back of Valentin Barrier as well. Porsche's typically not that great in a race setting, great in hot lap, but seems to struggle in the race. But looks like Jardier is managing, considering that I did also notice in the chat during practice that he also said he hopes his setup isn't too random. So I'm questioning how that Porsche is actually handling for him at the moment, but he's making it work, whatever the situation. Rupert has done a fairly good job catching up as we're watching Stevenson as well. He's looking like he's making a move on Garland. Looks like he's going to have the outside and doesn't quite have the legs, but maybe the brakes. And does he get the switch back? I think he has to back off, but that's not quite going to be enough to make that move stick. But if he can get the exit, lots of passing opportunities on this track. So if he just keeps this pace up, still an hour and 19 to go as well. But yeah, I thought he was going to go and make a move on the inside there, but not quite. But Garland goes wide, a little bit of a tap there. Back's just about out of it. He's going to have the inside going down the craters. Garland just maybe a little bit wide there, maybe loses the car a little bit and pushes Stevenson wide. It goes well wide. That's going to leave Lawrence chance. Is that Lawrence or is that not Felix's chance to get in the background? But then Garland's also pushing Stevenson off as well. The two Camaros side by side. Felix has gotten past Sundstrom.
Stephenson had to ease off when he made that overtake on Garland because he overtook off the circuit. He obviously cut the old hairpin. So he had to yield that position to Garland, or the stewards would be looking to hand him a 5-second penalty for his troubles. So well done there by the 108 to mind the track limits and say, look, I'm going to give that back. I don't want any problems from the stewards as is. I'd rather just continue the race as we are. And continuing the race as they are is the front of the GT4 field. Mike Noble still leads from Cormac Ryman, and that Porsche getting all out of shape coming out of the Melbourne loop. That's the second time we've seen that. And James Parker still lurking. Charlie Crossland still lurking, and Martin Lawrence is on the back of these guys as well. Not too much time, and there goes Matt Samuel wide in the final corner. Thiago Lima's going to have that one for free, says thank you very much. And the little orange Ginetta makes its way past the Porsche, and Matt Samuel's not going to be able to retake that into the first corner, and now he's got Jarkko Torvinen for company. Yeah,
it was a pretty late on the brakes by Torvinen now, as we also see Pride. Pride is also catching up to the GT3s as well, GT2s, GT4s as well, and this is we see it's Felix and Stephenson, the two Camaros coming together on the final turn. That's not what you want to see, but that's cost them a ton of time, and that also explains why Pride was also able to catch up so quickly as well. And it seems that both Felix and Stevenson have got so much time to make up now. That's just that will pack up quite a fair bit.
That's not convenient for either of them at all. Speaking of not being convenient either, George Boothby has Felix Ruppert for company, which isn't convenient for him. Felix Ruppert, who, by the way, had a fantastic race out at Brands Hatch, bringing home a podium, now has the chance to throw himself onto the podium early on here in round 4. That McLaren has just found pace over the last couple of races. You can see Valentin Barrier and Jaroslav Honzik for the Jardier community team, both of those two teammates, just lurking behind, waiting to pick up any pieces of a potential accident as well. And well, they'll be hoping that there's no dramas between those two drivers as well. It's a bit awkward whenever you crash into your teammate. I would know because it's happened to me on the receiving end and on the sending end.
Unfortunately, it has been known to happen. But no, Hervenen's lead's just been eaten into by Stilvason. Aston, I think as the track is starting to dry out, I think the NSX's advantage is slowly disappearing, but and he's looking at the forecast as well. It's not looking good for the NSX if that theory is correct, but he is still ahead, and he is ahead by about 1.3 seconds. So he could still hold on to this for as long as he can, and even still catching up is one thing and getting by is another thing entirely. As we see Garland in the pits, I think he got a little bit caught up with everything earlier and maybe just decided to take that stop early. Obviously, Matt Samuel obviously went wide last time we saw him as well, and now he's still got Torvinen behind him, but he has also caught up to the back of Thiago Lima. He's going to be just trying to find, looking for a way past and a way to catch back up to the rest of the field, but currently caught in a bit of a Ginetta sandwich.
Definitely so. And Stilvason, this is the closest that he's been to Leo Hervenen for the first 15 minutes of this race, and I'm pretty sure he'd like to be ahead of Leo Hervenen at this point in time. But monitoring everything as we go on. The track's still damp. The rain still falling and still scheduled to fall for the next 30 minutes. So everything still as it is at this point in time. Jardier continuing onwards in 6th place at the moment as they start to make their way through some of the GT4 traffic. Of course, they're just kind of finding the GT4 stragglers at this point in the race, aren't they? Just managing... Ooh! Well, that was Stephenson, wasn't it? Just getting out of shape there. Ruppert's having to take avoiding action. That's not great for Ruppert. And here comes Barrier. He says, look, I need to get through. Jardier's going to follow through onwards, and that's compromised Ruppert significantly. Had to wait for Stephenson to get on the power. And that's given George Boothby some much-needed breathing room as Steele Vason continues to hound Leo Hirvonen as he has Mikael Sundstrom just in front of him. They won't catch the big pack of GT4s for another lap, I would expect. But at this point in time, just making their way through some of the stragglers that have been left behind from the pack.
No, absolutely. I think Hirvonen at this point is going to be counting on some of the back markers and try and use that to his advantage a little bit. If he can just get by, I think he just tried to do that with Sundstrom just there as well. Just try and get by and hope Sundstrom holds up Steele Vason a little bit. But I think that's just had the exact opposite effect. Steele Vason right on the back of Hirvonen. The pole on the inside of the apex going absolutely flying into the grass. On the back wing of Hirvonen now going down towards the Fogarty S's, and Steele Vason only 0.2 of a second behind at this point, and perhaps even within striking distance depending on if he can get this exit, and it looks like he has. He does have a little bit of speed. He's got to look towards the inside. It's not quite going to be enough to get by, but maybe on the undercut. But it all depends on the exit, and he doesn't quite make it stick, but going into the next lap, being this close behind, and never mind, just going on the inside, late on the brakes, and a little bit of a tap there, and it's going to put them side by side on the run down to T1, and just a little bit of a door bang, just...
And now they've called the GT4s as well to top that all off. Steele Vason won't gain anything out of that little tap that he had with Hirvonen, so I don't think there'll be much of a steward's inquiry there, but they've hit the GT4 pack, and Steele Vason trying to cut the curbs to get around. He doesn't want Leo Hirvonen to get up the road. Traffic management so important, especially in the early phases of this race. And this is benefiting Hirvonen now. So Steele Vason, he'll be frustrated. He'll be so annoyed that he hasn't managed to close that. But now he'll close it. He'll get past Kilian Ryan Meenan as Hirvonen gets held up by Jarkko Torvinen. Can Steele Vason clear the Ginetta? He'll be on the inside. Yep, he'll get through, and that's going to close the gap back up again. So as much as it increases, it decreases as well as they navigate through the traffic at this point in time. And George Boothby, he's going to be looking at all this as well, thinking to himself, like, how can I close in on these guys ahead? And how can I use these guys to put more distance between myself and Felix Ruppert as we come into the Melbourne Loop? And Steele Vason, well, everything is basically reset. The distance between the two of them 1 lap later, practically identical.
Well, you say that, but Boothby's also in the mix as well, catching right up, tucking him right behind Thiago Lima as well, as just down the road as well, we do see Jardier catching up as well, and yeah, Boothby, the gap is under less than a second now between him and Steele Vason, as we see Ruppert, Valentin and Jardier taking the first of their 2 pit stops.
Interesting time to take them as they catch the mass amount of traffic. Maybe some strategy involved there. Get themselves out of traffic into some clean air and get one of their pit stops out of the way as early as possible. Meanwhile, here comes Steele Vason and Hirvonen, both of them trying to navigate these GT4s as Parker and Cormac Ryan Meenan just in front of them. And then here is the GT4 leader, Mike Noble. So close between these GT4s, and the GT3s aren't really splitting them up too much. The gap's remaining rather constant. Steele Vason having to hug the inside line, making sure he doesn't cause contact with the Alpine, and now the 2 leading GT3s have cleared the field of GT4s, so it's all as it was before. And now Steele Vason and Hirvonen, they can go toe-to-toe on pure pace until they end up catching the pack again.
Yeah, and that's not great news for Hervenen either, given Stilvasen's pace currently, the track drying out, and maybe the NSX just maybe falling off just a little bit. I think this is going to become a bit more of a defensive drive for the most part until at least the next stop, but strategy can still come into it. The weather is changing, and it looks like Hervenen's had a bit of a better run going down to start is it lap 13, lap 14 that we're on currently. Stilvasen just closing the gap. He just seems so much more confident under brakes, and where Hervenen just has a better exit in a lot of places and maybe a little bit of a higher apex speed.
The
Stilvasen
Aston Martin excels in these conditions, though. I mean, we've seen it in the past. It does love the mixed conditions or the wet conditions, and of course, Stilvasen putting that to full effect here today. Hervenen, meanwhile, we've seen the NSX do quite well on some of the new British GT tracks. It definitely has had a bit of a resurgence in popularity for these circuits, and that is great to see because it's fantastic to see this car out on track. And Stilvasen was so close to the back of Leo Hervenen there. Meanwhile, Stephenson has received a 15-second penalty. And looking down here, that's the 108 of Stephenson for colliding with the 88. So that was Andre Felix. So that was the two Camaros down at the final corner. And I think, I mean, despite the fact that I don't think either driver, well, I know Stephenson didn't gain any places. I do know for a fact that Felix did lose 2 places. And Stephenson has ended up ahead of them. So that 15-second penalty checks out. Meanwhile, Leo Hervenen going a bit out of shape out of the final corner, and that's going to give Stilvasen some more confidence.
Absolutely, that gap is closed up even more as we're riding on the front splitter of Stilvasen, just closing up the gap, and it seems like it's opening and closing, and it's starting to equalize. And rain obviously visibly getting lighter and lighter. You just see, I mean, just in the braking zones, you just see Stilvasen just catching up, and then Hervenen will pull a bit of a gap, but then it'll happen again. Looking into the braking zone again, Stilvasen will just close the gap and keep it there for a little bit, and that's going to open up an opportunity to maybe look on the inside at some point. Still an hour left to go, still 2 stops left to go, and I don't think he's going to be counting on any of that, given how much he seems to want that position, and I can't say that I don't blame him. Boothby on board in P3, just watching the action up ahead as well. He's less than a second off now. I take that back. He's 1.3 seconds off, but still, he is still gaining just a little bit. Because I mean, he was closer to 2 seconds once the traffic was said and done. So Boothby getting a little bit of pace going on as well there.
Stilvasen, he's got a championship to fight for, as does George Boothby. So I don't think there's going to be any silly moves coming out from either of those two. Leo Hervenen, he's just racing for himself at this point. He's not in the championship battle at all. So he doesn't really care. He's just in it for the individual results and see how much he can improve his standing at this point in time. Meanwhile, Stilvasen, he's not going to want to pick up any silly penalties or take himself out of the race, not when he knows that there is still 3 races and 2 rounds left to go of this championship. And that's the mentality that you have to have with some of these, championships. You've got to think of the short term, but you've also got to think of the long term. You can't be making any silly mistakes and taking yourself out of the race, because at this point in time, if Stilvasen takes himself out and George Boothby ends up on the podium, it's championship fight over. And that's, you've got to be so consistent. And Mike Noble, he's pretty consistent at the moment, still leading the GT4 class for FFS Racing, and Cormac Grime in a slight bit of a gap now as Milton Stilvasen has gone slightly wide, and that's going to bring George Boothby a bit into play here. So Stilvasen maybe just pushing a bit too hard, and George Boothby has now come to play, gets a bit closer and says, "Ooh, I don't mind second place,
Yeah, I think Boothby's going to be looking to make that gap kind of disappear, really, for lack of a better word. And it looks like he's right at work with that, and it's allowing Hervenen to maybe pull a little bit more ahead. But then again, under brakes, we see Stilvasen maybe going a little bit wide. Boothby following him in with that. I don't think it's going to allow them to capitalize on the exit either. So that's going to allow Hervinen to pull a little bit of a gap. Still racing currently 7/10 behind Hervinen. But again, just under braking. Under braking, he just manages to close it up just a little bit more. And now the car's equally spaced yet again as we were later in the last lap. And it just seems to start the cycle all over again as we see Stevenson in the pits taking one of those mandatory stops and also serving that 15-second time penalty that we saw earlier.
Oh, the 899 down at the loop. There was a yellow flag there just a moment ago. Mikael Sundstrom was static on track. I wonder if we can catch what happened here. We will be able to catch it, courtesy of Jake Coombs, our cameraman here tonight, doing a fantastic job. So what happened to Mikael Sundstrom down towards the loop? He's on his own. Oh, Killian Ryan Meenan's off. Oh, no. This is... it's just wrong place, wrong time, isn't it? Killian just trying to get his car turned back around. I mean, he's fully entitled to do so as well, but just didn't get it turned around quick enough, and Mikael Sundstrom unfortunately found him at the apex.
Yeah, a lot of things could affect that, especially both drivers' field of views. As we're seeing Stilvason take a look on the inside, has to back out a little bit. That's allowing Boothby to close up a bit of a gap and maybe getting a run down into the final turn. I don't think it's going to happen though, but anyone can stay hopeful, and the gap to Hervinen just closed again, and Hervinen going wide yet again as we saw 2 or 3 laps ago. Boothby diving into the pits. I thought that I almost thought he clipped the outside curb there, but thankfully not, and he's going to be serving his first pit stop. Why get caught behind everyone when you can get one out the way and rethink the strategy and catch up later? These guys also still have to stop as well, so see if we can get the undercut. Hervinen pulling a little bit of a gap behind the trainers.
Killian Ryan Meenan, stop and go penalty for speeding in the pit lane. Oh,
shame. As if that lap couldn't get any worse for him, Ryan.
Yeah, and that's going to be a DNF as well. He's done for the day. That car is parked. And a rather frustrated Killian has unfortunately brought an end to his day a bit earlier than he would have planned, only 27 minutes into the race. And that's the problem that you can get sometimes. You've got to do these pit stops. You've got to get the pit entry and exit right. And if you don't, well, ACC punishes you hard. But to comment on, your George Boothby idea, strategy, it's a great idea. If you think that these two are going to hold each other up, get into the pits.
The place for Ruppert currently. I'm sorry for interrupting there, Ryan. But Ruppert has just gotten by Boothby as well. They came out of the pit lane just a bit side by side, going down into the craners, and that's Jardier also taking a look on the inside. He's fancying his chances, and Jardier, let's not forget, Jardier's also taking one of his stops as well. So has Ruppert. So this is a straight fight for position at this point, really.
It is a straight fight for position, and this is not what George Boothby wanted. He wanted to come out in clear air. He wanted to be able to set down some hot laps and close in on the two leaders whilst they battle amongst each other. Now he's found himself in an even worse situation where he's battling the likes of Ruppert and Jaroslav Honzik. Ruppert has ended up ahead. Jardier is now pressuring him. Stilvason is in the pit lane. He's going to look for an undercut attempt on the likes of Leo Hervinen. All the strategy kicking off now. And, well, George Boothby, this is the trade-off, isn't it? He pitted to try and find clear air, but it hasn't worked out. It's always a gamble unless you know the gap, unless you know for sure that you're going to come out in clear air. It's always a gamble, and for George Boothby, it just hasn't really worked out this time.
It really hasn't, with Stilvason leaving the pit lane now. I think he's going to come out ahead of Boothby. Where is Boothby at the moment? He's still down the start-finish.
Well ahead.
Yeah, that's
well ahead.
That really did not work out for Boothby at all. And now he's got so much ground to make up, and I've no doubt that he's got the pace to do it. But that is not what he was looking for. With traffic ahead as well with the GT4s, Stilvason's coming out in 5th, with Guglia in 4th and Svenchek in 3rd. But they have still yet to make the stop. But so does Hervinen.
Ruppert gets held up by the GT4s. That's going to allow George Boothby to have a go here, but Ruppert is going to use the traffic, and look at that. Masterfully done by Ruppert. Place George Boothby in a situation where he can't force a move on Jarkko Torvinen, and in the background, barrier! Valentin Barrier has gone into the back of Jarkko Torvinen, and those cars are in the wall.
It just looked like, was it Torvinen just pushing Jardier a little bit wide? Jardier manages to get by, but then Torvinen, we're having to leave space, just almost runs into barrier just a little bit. See, there's a little bit of a space there. Tries to leave space for Jardier. Doesn't see barrier behind, and not a whole lot anyone could do in that situation, really. There was just a lot of cars in one place at the same time.
This is the problem when the cars just... You sometimes as a GT3, you're so eager to get past these GT4s, and sometimes, you know, patience is a virtue, and sometimes it's better to back out of it and wait, lose some time, than cost your race, you know, significantly. And unfortunately for Valentin Barrier and Jarkko Torvinen, it cost their race significantly. Felix Ruppert, by the way, is still holding off George Boothby, as Thiago Lima gets the treatment from George Boothby of send up the inside. And Felix Ruppert, I mean, what a drive this is.
Oh, absolutely. He's just been keeping it consistent. He's managed to make the pace up, to make that spot with Boothby under the pits as well. And I suppose he didn't really. Boothby still came out ahead, but Ruppert managed to make the move stick. And obviously cold tyres are also still in effect as well, but making a slight dive on Crossland, and that's going to allow Boothby to catch up a little bit, coming up to the back of the BMW of James Parker. It's going to be fairly swiftly dispatched, and that has just put the BMW between himself and Boothby, and that's going to allow him to make a little bit of a gap, but that's not going to last for too long. Jardier is not letting...
Yeah, but look at the GT4. It's going to be 3 wide down towards the foggy S's. Cormac's trying to get around Mike Noble. Here come the GT3s. George Boothby sends it on Mike Noble. Mike Noble's probably not too happy about that. Cormac had to back out. Jardier got held up. It's absolute chaos out here at Donington Park at this point in time, but most of them keeping it fairly clean as well. Here comes Cormac again. Charlie Crossland is on the back of James Parker, and towards the front of the GT4 grid. It was all calm and collected for 30 minutes of this race, and now it's all truly kicking off as the GT3s make their way through. They'll carry on. My word, and here comes George Boothby as well. We're getting information from the chat. Oh, he's collided with Ruppert, and that's Ruppert around.
And that's going to allow Boothby. He's going to have to sit and wait for Ruppert to get by through unless he wants to risk the penalty, and that's just made him drop back so far. The GT4s that they've just spent all that time overtaking and all of that drama have just gone again. They need to basically undo all that work has just been undone. They need to redo that. And Jardier is also going to take advantage of that as well. He's going to say, "Thank you very much. I'll take that position if you guys don't want that." And as we see our race leader, Leo Hovinen, into the pits, can he get the overcut? Is he going to come out in front of Steele Basin? It might happen. Steele Basin going down into the fog of TS's. This is going to be really, really close, but I think it might actually happen.
Well, just a comment as well on something we were being informed by the chat. George Boothby apparently missed his pit box, so that cost him 5 seconds in the pit lane, and that 5 seconds was the difference between getting stuck behind Felix Ruppert and having clear air, and that just shows you how a mistake in your pit stop can significantly affect your race. Here comes Steele Vason, by the way. Leo Hovinen is rolling again. The Aston Martin is going to be ahead. Steele Vason takes the lead, well, technically the lead, as Guglia and Boardman are still yet to pit. So the Aston Martin out in front, and a good gap out in front as well from Steele Vason. Fantastic strategy there to pit early, get in clear air, and use the undercut to his advantage. And you know what's worked out even better for the likes of Steele Vason is because of that mistake with George Boothby, where he went into the back of Ruppert, had to slow down, had to give the place back. He's got more places between him and his championship rival than he did before. And, well, it's all going Steele Vason's way at this point in time, as George Boothby, he's still looking to find a way past the likes of Felix Ruppert. Going to have a look on the inside again. No, not quite able to do so. But just to comment again, fantastic sportsmanship it was by George Boothby to put his hand up and say, look, that was my mistake, have the place back. But Felix Ruppert will make a mistake. There goes George Boothby. Finally gets the pass done. And this time it will count.
Oh, absolutely. I was bringing up that point there about sportsmanship. I think even with the 5-second penalty, I don't think it would have compromised Boothby as much as actually waiting to let Ruppert by. So, no, something you kind of have to commend at this point. It looks like Ruppert might actually have a run down the inside there. As we're back with Boardman, currently in the lead, but still to pit. And Ruppert just didn't quite make the move stick as we see there. But no, Boardman, Guglia running P1 and 2 still to pit. So I mean, still Vason only 5 seconds behind. I don't think, yeah, they're not going to hold on to that.
Oh no, definitely not. Guglia is quite a ways off Andy Boardman, but even then, Andy Boardman, when he comes in to do that pit stop, he's going to lose that place. Charlie Crossland and James Parker both in the pits, by the way, for the GT4 class. As I think that's Matt Samuel coming in as well. So both of them going to get their first pit stops of the race out of the way. Mikael Sundström, he's also decided to come in. Mike Noble, he still leads the way. Of course, he's already done one of his mandatory stops. So is Cormac Ryan Meenan. You can see behind, of course, Killian, if you didn't see earlier on. He's found himself out of the race. Stop and go penalty for speeding in the pit lane and decided to park the car. Martin Lawrence, though, he's managed to get himself in between the likes of Mike Noble and Cormac Ryan Meenan throughout the course of the pit stop. So Martin Lawrence using the strategy very well to his advantage. Here come the leaders, though, and they're going to come out just ahead of them. So Martin Lawrence, who was 5th, I believe, in GT4, now effectively sits 2nd.
Yeah, that's the difference that that is the difference that strategy can make, and we're only on the first of 2 mandatory stops as well. So, I mean, there's still an hour of the race to go, still one more stop, and this whole switch up, this whole kind of shake up of positions, I think we're going to begin to see it all over again. Especially looking at the weather, it's still looking like it's drying up. Still Vason getting a little bit wobbly there down at the bottom of the hill, but back with Lawrence. Actually, still Vason's got past Panker, and he's looking at the back of Thiago Lima as well. Hovnen 5 seconds down the road. You see him in the back of frame there. I don't think we can discount Hovnen out. It's going to be a case of what kind of pace is he putting in, what kinds of pace is he getting from that NSX right now, and can he just get his head down enough? Jardier making his way into 3rd as well. Fair bit ahead of... actually, no, I don't think he is that far ahead of Bob.
No, Boardman's just behind him. And Andy Boardman, by the way, he's gained out of that George Boothby Felix Ruppert incident. That allowed Andy Boardman to jump both of those guys, so George Boothby effectively lost 2 places with that Felix Ruppert incident.
Yeah, 2 places at a whole lot of time. I see like 7.5 seconds back at this point, as we see Boardman just nibbling on the back of Jardier just a little bit, and I don't think he's going to be wanting to hang around for too much longer. We've seen how strong the Astons have been on the brakes around here, and as you said, Ryan, these Astons, they are very strong in the wet as a whole anyway. Very, very stable cars in these kinds of conditions. And it's quite the polar opposite for the Porsche, really. But Jardier making that one stick. Boothby still 7.5 seconds behind with traffic to deal with as well. I think this isn't going to be clear cut by any means.
No, definitely not. Just under 52 minutes of this race remaining. Everyone still has 1 pit stop left to do. Everyone has done at least 1 pit stop, so the positions you see on the timing board at this point in time are accurate representations of where everyone is on track, regardless of strategy. So Steele Vason leads the way from Leo Hovnen and Jardier in the top 3. Andy Boardman from George Boothby, Felix Ruppert, Valentin Barrier, Cody Pride, Peter Probar, and Svenchek round out the top 10. Guglia, the lone GT3 outside of the top 10. Then in GT4, it's Mike Noble from Martin Lawrence and Cormac Ryan Meenan in the top 3. Charlie Crossland, he managed to jump James Parker in the pit stops. Then it's Thiago Lima, Gogo Panker, Garland, Samuel, Sundström, Torvinen, and Felix, with Killian, Ryan Meenan, and Stephenson, the 2 retirements so far from this race.
Given how crazy this race has been so far, it's also been fairly clean, it must be said. And see Cormac Ryan Meenan, Hovnen just getting by. He's going to be wanting to try and take that position back from Lawrence, but it looks like it's also one step in letting Crossland join the fray a little bit as well. And Hervenen's just going to be wanting just to get by nice and clean, nice and quickly, and try and build that gap to Jardier. I mean, 3.2 seconds is the gap between second and third place, and it's really not that much, really, when you consider the stage of the race that we're at the moment. And it looks like Still Vason's just going to be trying to make the most of the clear air ahead as well.
The GT4's still so close together after, well, it's been 40 minutes of this race. We kind of tend to see this with the GT3s, don't we? That around about 30 minutes in, they do spread out quite a bit. But as the GT3s continue to make their way through the GT4 traffic, the GT4s do still find themselves fairly close together. And you mentioned about how clean this race had been. We've only had 3 time penalties handed out over the course of this race so far, and you know what? In 40 minutes, that's not bad, especially for a wet race around here at Donington Park. The start was very, very clean. I don't think there were any accidents at all on the first lap, so absolutely fantastic to see. And, well, we can only hope that that continues for the rest of this race and the rest of the season.
That is very, very true, especially considering the last time we were at Donington, where I think some of the drivers did struggle a little bit, but they've obviously been practicing. Jardier pulling a little bit further ahead of Boardman, but all things considered, Boardman really did benefit from the Boothby incident. Speaking of Boothby, he is starting to eat into the gap just a little bit. He has pulled a little bit ahead of Ruppert as well, but not looking great for our championship leader. Not a great race so far.
Now, George Boothby sitting 5th at this point in time. If I have a look at the championship standings, obviously we don't unfortunately have the standings as up to date, as Valentin Barry has apparently just received a 15-second time penalty. I can only assume that that's for the incident with Jarkko Torvinen up towards the right-hander, where we saw them both go into the wall. I can only assume that is for that incident. But Milton Steele-Vason, if he wins here today, he'll collect 65 points for.
And Comet Ryan Min side by side. I think Crossland has just gotten by for. Crossland has just gotten by Cormac, and I'm sorry, I just got distracted by my timing sheet as well. Boothby has been given a 5-second time penalty, and I'm wondering what that could have been for, because he did give that position back to Ruppert. I wonder if that's something else the stewards just weren't happy with.
It might be a 5-second penalty for the fact that Felix Ruppert has lost a place to Andy Boardman and Jaroslav Honzik as a result of that incident.
That makes sense.
Because Jardier did, of course, get past both of them due to the incident, and Andy Boardman, judging by where he was on track when Jardier came out of the pit lane, it's pretty fair to say that Andy Boardman jumped them because of the incident as well. So I believe that the stewards have felt it necessary to award the minimum possible penalty, which is 5 seconds. That would have been a 15-second penalty had George Boothby not given back the position. So he did obviously alleviate a much more severe penalty by showing that sportsmanship. But unfortunately, because of the 2 places lost by the likes of Felix Ruppert, the stewards have said, well, you know, we need to award something. And, you know, it's up to you whether you think that's you know, appropriate or not. I typically don't tend to give my opinions on stewarding too much, because there's always lots of controversy around penalty decisions as such, but I think 2 places, 5 seconds, you could call it either way. You could say it's harsh, or you could say it's fair.
Absolutely, and there's still one more stop to go. It's a plus 5 seconds to the stop, so it's not the total end of the world, and still a bit of a slap on the wrist for, you know, you gotta, you know, the responsibility for actions has to be taken. As we've, as we say, we saw Crossland get past Cormac, and Cormac wants that position back, and fairly clean exit, but not like the same can't be said for Parker. Parker had a bit of a wide exit there, as you saw in the background of shot. Doesn't seem to cost him anything though. Still a bit of a gap to Thiago Lima. Thiago Lima actually doing a really good job making his way through the GT4 field as well. So far the GT4 is just still fairly close. I think that's Cody Pride we see in the background. still hasn't made the stop, but he has come up to traffic. He is going to make his way through, and considering how far back Cody Pride got sent, especially with that time penalty as well, Ryan, P8.
Yeah, he pitted early, didn't he? Really early on when he got that penalty, and still in 8th place. I think that's where he was when he came into the pit lane, so he hasn't really gained or lost anything as a result of that. He will gain a position from Valentin Barrier as soon as that 15-second penalty is served. Assuming he can keep within 15 seconds, he's 7.5 off at the moment. We've reached the halfway point of the race. 45 minutes in, 45 to go. And, well, for the next half an hour, still scheduled to rain. So it looks like we might not have a dry period of this race, or if we are going to have a full dry period, it's going to come very, very late on, and that could have a massive impact on strategy. We'll keep our eyes peeled, but for the moment, we expect the rain to continue falling, but it's not falling too much, still very light. And of course, the circuit a bit damp, but not too wet.
No, it's I'd say it's a pleasant spring afternoon. More than anything, Ryan, especially around, because we're not that far from Yorkshire, so it seems pretty apt for real life, really, as we see Matt Samuel taking a look on the, well, what was the inside, but turning to the outside of Andrew Garland. So he's just going to be going side by side. Can he get the cutback? Just a later apex, a better exit. I don't think it's going to happen. Garland's going to just have, yeah, he's defended that pretty well. So discount going into T1, a little bit late on the brakes. Can he take a look on the inside? I don't think he is, but it's not quite close enough to make it work.
Matt Samuel continues to race onwards. Of course, he's just trying to improve his position. He was doing fairly well towards the start of the race, has dropped off a bit now at this point in time. I think he was one of the drivers that might have caught a penalty, if I remember correctly, or at least came into the pits early. I do remember that. But Milton Steele-Vaessen, he hasn't had a penalty at all, and he's going to continue onwards in the lead at this point in time, 6.3 seconds up the road, and he's looking comfortable out there.
He is. He's just pulling that gap, and sorry for interrupting you, Ryan, but no, he is just pulling that gap, and I think Hovnen is starting to struggle a little bit, and I wonder if anything's happened to Jardier, or if Hovnen is just genuinely pulling a gap. The gap was 3.7 seconds at last look. So that is also increasing, and that's pushing something. I think something might have happened to Jardier, and it has just pushed him a little bit closer to Boardman.
Yeah, I was looking at the standings for what could change, and as it stands, Milton Steele-Vaessen will be picking up 65 points for a win here tonight. George Boothby, if he finishes in 5th place at this point in time, he will pick up 44 points. So as it stands, Milton Steele-Vaessen set to bring the gap down in the championship by 21 points. Alan Garland back in the pit lane. And if I have a little look here, 21 points, if he can manage to close that gap down at this point in time, would mean that there's only a 3-point gap between the likes of Steele-Vaessen and George Boothby coming into the final 2 rounds of the championship. And how fantastic would that be if coming into the last 2 rounds, we've only got a few points between the 2 contenders?
Absolutely. I mean, there's been several occasions in this championship where things have come down to the wire, and I think the final win for the championship will be one of them, as we see Crossland give Lawrence a little bit of a tap going through the Fogarty S's. And I think, if anything, that's just benefited Lawrence a little bit as well, just creating a tiny bit of a gap. But Crossland definitely making his presence known.
Definitely is the GT4 championship leader. Well, James Parker would have been hoping to possibly close that gap tonight, not looking that way at this point in time, as Charlie Crossland finds himself on the GT4 podium and James Parker finds himself in 5th place. And Charlie Crossland, looking at this point in time to put his Aston Martin on the second step of the podium. Mike Noble just a bit further up the road, but still plenty of time left in this race for Charlie Crossland to close down if he was looking for a win. And he's looked very, very good, Charlie Crossland, over all the races that we've had so far in this championship. And Martin Lawrence struggled a bit on a couple of circuits, but he's doing very well here at Donington Park this evening in the weather. The Camaro, well, at least Martin Lawrence's Camaro, doing much better than the other Camaros that we've seen. Felix, of course, way further down in the order, and Stephenson, unfortunately, retiring from the race. So just seems to be Martin Lawrence. He's the Camaro whisperer at this point in time. But here comes Charlie Crossland, speaking of. And Charlie Crossland is going to look to go side by side. They make their way down towards the foggy S's. And Martin Lawrence, he's going to lift off early. He's going to give that position up. He doesn't want any of this from Charlie Crossland. Maybe looking at the number 10 and thinking, you know what, I really don't want to pressure him into making a mistake or a silly little move. He's going to let him go, and he's just going to get on with his race.
Absolutely. As you said earlier, you have to think about the grand scheme of things, the championship as a whole, and you don't want to do anything out on track that might compromise yourself or anybody else, but that is going to put him in the firing line of Cormac Ryan Meenan. Thiago Lima looking like he's going to be a little bit ambitious going up to the inside, but just manages to pull it just behind James Parker still, and I think we just saw, was that Cody Pride in the pits as well, taking what will be the last stop for the for him for the GT3s. It's going to be interesting to see where he comes out at, as we see that's Guglia and Svenchek in the Jaguar and the Bentley catching up to the small little pack of GT4s here with Thiago Lima and James Parker. And just yeah, you just saw Guglia just make a massive gap as Svenchek just gets the traffic a little bit wrong, goes for a pass, has to back out. Does very well to avoid contact, it must be said, but has just cost him a lot of time. And this is the battle before 9th and 10th currently for the GT3s. So they will fall back once Pride catches up and they have to make their final stop.
Yep, Cody Pride, the only GT3 to have completed both of the mandatory pit stops here tonight. And Cody Pride perhaps gambling on the fact that it's not going to go dry before the end of this race. It's looking less and less likely by the minute. Alan Garland and Jarkko Torvinen are the only two GT4s to have done all their pit stops, but they find themselves, I think, a lap down on the rest of the GT4 field. So at this point in time, Alan Garland and Jarkko Torvinen not really in too much contention for some serious places. Obviously, Garland a bit further up the road, maybe can get onto the back of the GT4 pack once they all come in for their pit stops. But Jarkko Torvinen here, looking like he's a lap down on Mike Noble, looking like he could go a lap down on Charlie Crossland in a matter of corners.
So this is great news for Mike Noble as well, because with Crossland being caught behind Torvinen, bear in mind it's GT4 and GT4, so it's not going to have the pace to just walk by like the GT3s can, and that's going to allow Noble to make a bit of a gap, and maybe even Lawrence catching Crossland as well. And it looks like the gap is starting to decrease a little as we see Svenchek. Obviously the GT3s having their own battle, and the Jaguar is slipping in just nicely behind the Ginetta. The Bentley taking a look on the outside of the Aston. I think he is just going to see, this is the difference in power and straight line speed between the two classes. Just walks by and going a little bit close, little bit tight with Crossland and Torvinen, but how did they avoid contact there?
I don't know, but that's allowed Charlie Crossland to get a really good drive, and Jarkko Torvinen, of course, being the blue flagged car, he will concede. And Martin Lawrence goes slightly wide. Valentin Barrier back in the pit lane, by the way. He's going to serve his final stop of the race alongside that penalty that he picked up. I think Jarkko Torvinen, is he just moving out of the way for Martin Lawrence now? Well, not moving out of the way too keenly.
No, I think he's still in his own race. He's just not allowed to defend, and he's not going to. He's going to go wide and allow Lawrence through, I think, but not going to lose too much time. But that's also going to allow Cormac Ryan Meenan to just kind of tuck in a little bit nicely behind. And I don't know, given Torvinen's Tovenen's approach to this with the two cars in front, I think Cormac is going to have to try and find an opportunity as well.
Well, I mean, he's obviously quite frustrated after the Valentin barrier incident. So he's probably not too
Blame
keen
him.
to let anyone past him, blue flag or not.
Absolutely, no one can blame him for that either. And this is the joys of multiclass. We see Cormac getting a little bit sideways at the bottom of the hill there, just barely. I mentioned the whole
We've
bit.
seen that a few times this race. That Porsche getting a bit out of sorts.
I wonder if it's something to do with setup or whether or not he's just struggling with that a little bit. He is obviously the lead Porsche from the GT4s. Fun fact, the only other Porsche in the GT4s is Matt Samuel, who's currently in P19. So, yeah, he is pulling that Porsche to a pretty decent result. And he's got Martin Lawrence in sight and Crossland in sight. In fact, if he squints far enough, he can actually still see Mike Noble as well. So, with half an hour left of the race, any kind of incident that happens to befall the cars in front of him, don't rule him out.
You can't rule him out, and as we see one of the planes landing in the background, Milton Steele-Vason continues to charge onwards as he makes his way through some of the GT4 traffic. And whilst we have some breathing room, would obviously like to say a big thanks to some of the partners that we have here at Racing Club International that make all of this possible. Race Department, our technical partner, of course, and AK Informatica for providing the servers of which we race on. And Speed Labs, Raceface Speed Labs, if you want to get some coaching from some of South Africa's finest, Bruno Kadili and Jordan Sherritt, available on hand for some fantastic prices, by the way. And you can also get some replay and telemetry analysis as well. You can check them out, links in the description. And of course, Sim Racing GP, which will be going live soon. Not entirely sure as to exactly when the release date is, but it should be going live soon, and RCI will hopefully be moving over onto SGP full-time in not too many months. And of course, it'll be really exciting to continue the Racing Club International journey on the Sim Racing GP platform, and we'll have loads more news about our partnership with Race Department and how that could change in the future. In the next coming months. But back to the present, Steele-Vason doing a fantastic job out here at this point in time and looking very, very good, leading from Leo Hirvonen. 3.7 seconds though, that gap has come down.
It's come down absolutely significantly, and I think traffic has had a massive part to play in that as well. And Jardier starting to settle into the rhythm of third, I think. But again, if the traffic is anything to go by, it looks like Hirvonen might actually be catching Steele-Vason before the end of the race if this continues the way it seems to be.
Definitely so. Oh, Cormac into the pit lane. So Cormac Ryan Meenan comes into the pit lane. He's going to serve his final mandatory stop of the day. And we've also got George Boothby coming in as well. So George Boothby hopefully hits his marks this time around on the pit stop. And he'll get his second stop of the day out of the way.
That's really good news for him. Sorry, so you go first, right?
I was going to say, judging by the track map, I think he'll be fine. I don't think he'll come out behind any GT3s that he'll have to race for position. I think Peter Hrobar might be the closest, but I would imagine Peter Hrobar will probably be clear ahead or just behind him by the time they finish the pit stops. And in fact, here comes Peter Hrobar through the final corner. And he's going to be clear ahead of Boothby. No, he's going to come into the pit lane. Okay, so it doesn't matter. So Peter Hrobar comes into the pit lane. He's going to serve his final pit stop of the day. And this means that George Boothby will come out in clear air. And this time, the pit stop for George Boothby has come out exactly like he planned. And he'll have to hope that can make up for the earlier pit stop, which really didn't go to plan.
Absolutely. He doesn't really have to close the gap down by too much. All he has to do is just do what he seems to do best, is just get his head down, get consistent fast laps, and we know what he's capable of. We've seen it all season. We know what him and that McLaren can do. And hopefully, second attempt at the undercut, and this is what I was saying earlier, and this is like we've had round one of strategy. This is round two, and just as much as places got shifted the first time, I think it's going to happen all over again. I'm telling you. But for now, all he can do is just get his head down and just drive his best. I mean, that's the same for every driver, but now more so than ever.
Yeah, George Boothby. Felix Ruppert's come into the pit lane as well. James Parker, you saw him there stationary. McLaren just comes in right behind. And we'll have to see where that puts them. Felix Ruppert should come out behind George Boothby. Might come out behind Guglia. In fact, here's Andy Boardman though. He sits 4th place at this point in time. He's the driver that George Boothby is going to be aiming to get past before the end of this race. Jardier might be a bit of a stretch. Only 4 seconds up the road from Boardman though, so anything is possible. But here is Jardier. He's got Mike Noble just behind him, so he's cleared the GT4 leader again. And he's got 6.5 seconds to Leo Hirvonen just down the road.
Yeah, that gap has increased, but so has the gap between Hirvonen and Steelvason, just oh so slightly. Boothby just getting the hammer down, coming down the crane, as I said, just doing as best as he can. He has gotten past Ruppert, so that's one down, several more to go at this point. And, what is the gap between Boothby and Boardman right now? Boardman obviously still has the pit, so it's not the most accurate of statistic to actually know right now. It's all going to come down to, can that undercut benefit Boothby in the way that he tried to make it work the first time round? Didn't quite work his way, so let's see what can happen as he comes to the back of Cormac Ryan Meenan. It's going to be no contest. He's going to breeze by, which is typical of the multi-class scenario that we have going on, and right now he's just going to be a man on a mission, I think.
His pit stop was a bit slow again, though. George Boothby, 1:03 seconds in the pit lane. Compare that to some of the pit stops done by other drivers. Steelvason's first pit stop was 57.5 seconds. So George Boothby about 5.5 seconds slower than some of the quicker pit stops. So maybe slightly missed his box again.
Yeah, that seems in line with
the
penalty that he picked up.
The penalty. That makes sense.
Yeah, Boothby picked up that 5 seconds penalty for the collision with Ruppert, and it looks like he has the undercut has at least worked there, and he was ahead of Ruppert in the first place. So I'm derping at this point. There's so much going on. We know what we're doing. We promise. On the back of Jarvis of Hondic, and our race leaders making the final stop as well, and that is going to allow Hirvonen to get by as well, and that's Jardier also coming into the pit, so this is going to be, he's going to come up behind Steelvason, I'd imagine, but again, this is the undercut scenario. Can these guys make this undercut work? Can they catch up to Hirvonen? Is Hirvonen going to lose time to Boardman? Is Hirvonen going to lose time to Steelvason and Jardier and the final stop? Only 27 minutes of the race left to go. I don't think he's going to stay out too much longer. And then Boothby is also in the mix as well. P5, the cars ahead are in the pits as well, and this is where we find out whether this gamble's paid off, Ryan. This is when we find out, did that undercut work? I don't know if it is going to be enough. I think it's going to bring the gap closer, all things considered. There was a bit of a gap. Obviously, he did hold off and wait for Ruppert, but where is Jardier right now? Let's just check if he is still in the pits. He's leaving his pit box now. So is Steelvason. Steelvason's at the end of the pit lane. Boothby is, I think he will be coming up to the final turn now. He isn't going to beat them to the pit. He isn't going to beat them out of the pit lane, but that gap is considerably a lot smaller than it was before the pit line, before the round of pits. Can't speak. I'm sorry. There's so much excitement.
We'll have to see what that gap is when we get to the end of Sector 1. Usually with the undercut, you probably want it to go a bit further than usual. So Jardier crosses over into Sector 2. What's the gap going to be between himself and the likes of George Boothby? 5.1 seconds. So Boardman was about 4 seconds behind Jardier. So judging by that, if we're to believe that, then George Boothby should come out, well, Andy Boardman should come out just ahead or level with the likes of George Boothby. Here is Andy Boardman in the pit lane, by the way, so we're going to get to find out the answer to this right here, right now. Has George Boothby done enough to undercut Andy Boardman in the pit lane? Steelvason is still going on as planned. He should still be ahead of Hirvonen. by the time Leo Hirvonen comes into the pit lane, unless Hirvonen can go for a masterclass overcut. But we saw the undercut work fantastic for Steel Vason earlier on in the race, and I have no reason to believe it wouldn't work again later on in the race. Here is Jardier, there is Boardman. So he's come back out, but that doesn't look right because that he hasn't fit the
Tires.
he hasn't changed tires. He hasn't met the requirements, and
He hasn't filled the mandatory pit stop, and maybe he just took fuel. I was wondering, he was very quick in the pits, and that is just going to play into Boothby's advantage as well.
35 seconds, so yep, didn't take tires. That matches perfectly. Oh dear.
Got to be kicking himself after that one. I mean, oh, that.
You know what the worst, the horrible thing is, I've seen this story before. It was Andy Boardman at Suzuka for the McLaren Masters Cup. Same thing.
No.
Didn't take. I think it was fuel at this point. He didn't actually take fuel. I think he took tires instead. One way round or the other, it doesn't matter. It's Andy Boardman again, who's unfortunately made a mistake on the pit stops, and that is going to be his undoing. He's going to come back in this lap, surely.
I'm because Hirvonen's got this. Resli has pitted, and still he's been in the pits for a little bit now, and Still Vason is about to come up to the final turn, but I think Still Vason, the undercut might have worked. I'm sorry for cutting you off there, Ryan. It's just going to be just waiting. Hirvonen is still in the pits. He's still in the box, and no, it's not going to be enough. The car has just gone down. He is going to exit the pit lane, and as you just see there on screen, we just see Still Vason just get by, and with the gap that he built before, Hirvonen did a great job closing it down the first time, but with only 23 minutes left to go, I don't think he can do it again, but we will have to see. Boardman obviously P1 at the moment, but given the mistake, which as heartbreaking as it is, he's not going to be able to hold on to that, and that is going to open the firing line for Honda for Jardier as well. Cody Pride getting a little bit side by side with Svenchek. Started off so great for Cody, and very early on, just picking up the penalty, then making up the spot, making up the gap, and then just a little bit almost side by side. Svenchek squeezing him to the inside, and goes side by side going down into turn one. Cody Pride getting the move done on the straight, but not quite done and dusted yet, but it looks like it is now actually. So much excitement build up, but a bit of an anticlimactic ending to that one, but again,
Svenchek still needs to pit. So
that is a good point. That is a very good point. Svenchek starts to pit, as does Gluglia as well. But Gluglia is still in the pits as well with the Jaguar. And I wonder if that's going to allow him to get the undercut on Svenchek. They've been having a battle for most of this race. They've been kind of having their own little scraps, and everything's starting to fall into place just a little bit. And as we've been neglecting the GT4s, we see Charlie Crossland still to make a pit stop, but currently provisionally leading the GT4s. But I think Mike Noble is going to... I think he is going to have just about enough of a gap to maintain that lead. He's been kind of commanding the GT4s from start to finish, Ryan, at this point.
He has. He's done very, very well. Thiago Lima still trying to catch up to James Parker in the BMW as Peter Hrobaal makes his way through. Ooh, goes for a little bit of a switch here. Ooh, that's going to be a bit leery. Ooh, that's going to cause James Parker to cut the chicane slightly. He's going to have to slow down to make sure he doesn't get a track warning violation. And here comes Thiago Lima in the Ginetta. How late on the brakes is the Ginetta going to be? Look at these two cars. One of them is tiny, one of them is enormous, but the Ginetta manages to get past. And James Parker, he'll be really, really frustrated there because he knows that he lost that place primarily because of Peter Hrobaal getting a bit out of shape coming into the S's, and that meant he had to take avoiding action, which slowed him down, and that's going to allow Thiago Lima through. So James Parker's day goes from not so great to worse.
You really got to feel for James as well, because this isn't the first time that a GT3 has kind of ruined his charge to kind of like make up a few places. And,
last week.
Exactly. He'd close the gap, and then GT3 out of nowhere splits the gap and does all the good work, and not having a great time of it now. As we see Honzik on the back of Leo Hirvonen, he's caught up pretty damn nicely, if I do say so myself, as we see Crossland diving into the pits for the GT4 race. Honzik looking on the inside, let's not forget, he's a bit of a demon on the brakes at this point.
Oh,
I've been getting a little bit held up by Lawrence in the Camaro. That's not Felix. No, that's Andre Felix in the Camaro, and that's going to allow Jardier to actually squeeze on by past the NSX, putting the NSX down into what will be 4th position, 3rd once Boardman has taken that mandatory stop. But that's not great news for Leo at all. He's done such a good job all race keeping that thing in 2nd place. You know, just trying to hold off as best as he can. He's got very lucky with the demise of Boothby a little bit early on the race. And as we see, James Parker started to try and make his way back around Thiago Lima. He dives on the inside. He does have the straight line pace to try and make a move, but he's got to have the outside going down into the final turn. Can he get the switchback? This is all going to come down to, can he get the run down to T1? I don't think he is, but it's too early to say. Just pulling into the slipstream a little bit, as we see Mike Noble also, he has come out in ahead of Charlie Crossland, so Charlie Crossland has lost the lead. He just tapped Martin Lawrence as well, just going into T1. Just not quite doing that, and I think no, he hasn't lost the position. I don't think at this point. Rupert picking up a 5-second penalty, and I'm not entirely certain why.
Number 71, Felix Rupert, contact with car 171, so that was Martin Lawrence. So at some point the McLaren and the Camaro have had a bit of a coming together, and the stewards have decided that Rupert was responsible for that. And I mean, you can't really give a place back when you're in a different class. It doesn't really work like that. So a penalty kind of has to be applied in any sense. And Rupert finding himself with a 5-second penalty. I've just realised Andy Boardman needing to pit again means that Rupert will most likely be bumped up to 5th, because it's going to be at least 60 seconds that Boardman will be in the pit lane, and judging by how much time it will cost him to do that additional stop, that should be enough for Rupert to get ahead. So Rupert could be finding himself in 5th place, which wouldn't be too bad of a result for the number 71, but what it could have been today for him, and Andy Boardman, what it could have been for him today as well, was finding himself well and truly in a battle for a potential podium position. But
shows it is just racing, and I was just about to bring this little thing up, by the way, Ryan. I'm sorry for interrupting, but I said that Hervnen did a great job in holding off Boothby and not having to worry about, but that was a lie. Boothby has caught up right to the back of Rupert. As I said, he has just got his head down, and I don't think it's going to be long until he finds his way around the NSX. In fact, I think he's got to go for the dive now. Hervnen is going to block going into the last turn. There is a slight bit of a gap, but how long is that going to last? I do not know. Rounding the final turn now, starting a new lap. I think this will be lap 46 that we are on now. And again, Leo just getting a little bit defensive. What's Boothby going to do? Is he going to weigh up his options? I think he's going to hold back. There's no point in going for it. As we see Boardman taking that pit stop as well, going down the crane as Boothby just biding his time. He has the pace. Does he have the patience? As we speak, Honzik and Stilvassen are pulling ahead down the road. I don't know if there's enough time for him to really catch them, but it's not going to be no chance if he cannot get past Leo Hervnen.
And in the chat, someone just bringing up a fantastic point. Is Leo Hervnen on slick tyres, losing a ton of time? I have just checked it. There are Pirelli stickers on the side of that tyre. And, well, that means only one thing. It's a slick tyre. The wet tyres do not have Pirelli stickers on the side of them. So Leo Hervnen gambled for dry tyres in the latest pit stop. It doesn't look like it's working. Here comes George Boothby. He's going to be forced to the outside line of the chicane. Not going to have a dive. Going to think better of it. Now going to have a look towards the loop. The McLaren gets a better drive on the wet tyres on the inside line, and Hervnen's not really going to defend that too much. I think he knows that the job is done, and George Boothby is through up into 3rd place. So George Boothby finds himself back on the podium despite all of the chaos that's gone around him today. He has still found himself in a solid position, and it's 5.7 seconds up the road, 16 minutes remaining. Can he catch Jardier?
It's going to be a very, very tall order, but possibly, and you got to give it to him. Just fast, consistent driving, and it's brought him up at equally just as much heartbreak for Leo as well. Just taking that gamble and just it not quite working out, but still, Versen, 10 seconds to Jardier. So big lead. He's just put his head down and just got on with it, and not a whole lot more he's needed to do. He's just basically commanded this race for the majority of it at this point, and don't think it's something he's willing to relinquish. The situation, yeah, you can't, he hasn't put a foot wrong. You can't really fault him for anything as he's coming to the back of James Parker. A bit of a gap we saw with Thiago Lima and Parker. They were having a bit of a scrap earlier, and that gap's also increased. I wonder, probably GT3 squeezing through as well, and just likely right now, it's just a day in the life of James Parker, really, isn't it?
Well, Killian Ryan Meenan told me that this is some of the best fun they've been having in the GT4s for a long time now, which is great to hear. Killian probably not having the most fun today after he had to retire fairly early on in the race, and I'm sure he's going to love me mentioning that on stream again. But Charlie Crossland continues to chase down Martin Lawrence. Cormac Ryan Meenan is, of course, back up into second place. So championship leader in GT4 could find himself off the podium. Here comes the leader of GT3. Make his way past, and, well, the longer this race goes on, the longer that Martin Lawrence stays out in front, the more confident he will get that he's going to finish ahead of Charlie Crossland. And fun fact for you here, Josh, I had a look at this slightly earlier. Charlie Crossland going a bit wide.
Yeah.
There's a fun fact regarding podiums. There is not a single driver that has been on the podium in every single race this season.
That's a bit of a shake-up.
So we've got George Boothby, Ryan McIntosh, Charlie Crossland, and James Parker, all of which have 4 podiums so far this season. But of course, the keen-eyed among you will know that we've done 5 races so far this season. This is, of course, race 6. So no one has been on the podium for 100% of the championship so far. And of course, when it comes down to winners, well, we've had 4 different winners in GT3, and we've had 3 different winners in GT4.
Goes to show, like, we have such kind of tight racing as well, and it's a testament to not just the racing, but to just these guys as a whole. Like, there's a reason why these guys are in split 1. They are fairly quick, and the racing's always so much fun to watch. As Charlie Crossland still maintaining a bit of a gap to Lawrence, and currently sitting around about, was that 4 seconds to Cormac. Matt Samuel catching up to Alan Garland. A little bit of a gap closed out under braking. I think he got a little bit offline, but that doesn't seem to have hindered him too much, and we could be looking at a move being made from him in the next couple of laps.
And Andy Boardman, by the way, after serving a 3rd pit stop to actually get the requirements out of the way properly this time, has found himself down in 8th place. He's only 8 tenths off of Valentin Barrier, you can just see ahead of him. But unfortunately, not really working out the way of Andy Boardman today with the pit stops. But Cody Pride, though, it's kind of worked out for him in some sense, up into 6th place. He's got 11 seconds to Rupert ahead.
Hey, if it only makes up 6 seconds, that could also be P5 as well, and that's a little bit of a tap. Max Samuel just squeezing past Alan Garland, but other than that, fairly clean, I think. But just had a little bit of an overspeed there. As you see, Bob, and he is catching up to Barrier as well. It's only less than half a second behind. Can he get the better exit? Is he? I think he just maybe looked a little bit there, but he's quite far back. But that gap has now closed up fairly significantly. So Boardman making up for lost time.
Also, glad to say there's only been 5 penalties handed out so far this race as well. We mentioned that there was only 3 earlier. That's only gone up by 2 since then. So with 11 minutes remaining, only 5 penalties out so far in this race, and it's been fairly clean. We can only hope that the other splits have gone just as well here today. From what I've been hearing, I think all of the other splits have rain as well. So there was some not happy people in the Discord earlier, but you know what? It's all part of racing, it's all part of driver skill, and it's all part of the fun of dynamic weather in ACC. Test your skills in multiple different conditions, and of course, it wouldn't be right if we were in a British GT Championship and at least one of the races was wet.
No, absolutely, and it's pretty, as I said earlier, it's pretty apt for the setting, really, as we see Bodman just lost a little bit of time there to barrier. Got a little bit wide and a little bit squirrely. Looking down the field now, what is there to report? Obviously, we've got a whole mix, and obviously, this is something to report. Bodman catching right up to the back of barrier. You know, you look away for a second, and you blink and you'll miss it. Can you get the run down into the Melbourne Loop? Maybe just not quite, and you just see how much dirt has accumulated on the back of that Ferrari, Ryan. Just shows just how long we've been going for. Obviously, an hour and a half race, and there's not less than 10 minutes to go, and that has implications for a lot of the drivers. Boothby has lost time to Jardier, looking just from what I can see down the field at the moment. Bodman just, again, he's pretty close. He's trying to make up for the time. Obviously, both these drivers, actually, no, I'm looking a bit further up the field. No, both these drivers making up for lost time. Obviously, Barry also got involved in an incident earlier in the race as well with Torvinen. Squeezing past Garland just a little bit. Can he use the traffic to kind of build that gap just a little bit more? I think he has, but I think Boardman's main focus now is just going to be trying to squeeze past that Ferrari of Valentin Barrier.
So Valentin Barrier continues onwards, looking for a decent result in the first race for the championship for him here tonight. And something we've lost Leo Hirvonen.
Oh, we have? Oh no.
Leo Hirvonen has just disappeared. I saw my timing board update, and I was kind of confused as to why it had suddenly refreshed itself. But Leo Hirvonen has
The building, it appears.
or he's parked the car, one of the two. But that's massive, because that now promotes all the GT3s up by 1. So Ruppert's now into 5th place. Cody Pride is Ruppert's into 4th. Cody Pride is 5th. And Valentin Barrier and Boardman are now battling for 6th place. And considering the fact that Hirvonen was on dry tyres, that gamble that didn't work off, maybe
The final nail in the coffin, maybe. That's really heartbreaking. You really have to feel for Leo.
Still gone to the end. He was still on for a decent finish. I mean,
absolutely.
Still would have been in the top 5.
Absolutely. That's genuinely really heartbreaking to see. Obviously, I like to try and leave my own emotions out of this as best I can, but I really have to feel for him, because he did such a good job all race. You know, just less than 10 minutes to go, and just it's not what you want to see. Almost takes away a little bit from the fact that, you know, we still have Boardman and Barrier still going at it. But yeah, it's as if this race couldn't get any more mixed up, any more crazy.
So the top 3 as they were, and everyone below promoted by 1. Charlie Crossland makes his way up into 2nd place, as he's now got past the likes of Cormac Ryan Meenan. So
here's the move. Andy Boardman making Andy Boardman making the move on the outside of Valentin Barrier, going down into Melbourne Loop. I don't know if it's going to be enough. It's not going to be quite enough to make it stick by, but he gave it a good look. Sorry for interrupting you there, Ryan. It's not over yet, so I'm so sorry. It's not over yet. It looks like Boardman is going to look down the inside of the last turn. He positions himself absolutely brilliantly. Just tucks right in behind the section. Doesn't quite make it work, but does he have the exit? The gap is shortening. He's got to take a look down into T1. Going on the outside yet again, pulling up alongside. Has to back out of it slowly, and that is going to cost him a little bit of time. Again, I'm so sorry, Ryan. There's just so much going on here.
I'll finally get out my praises for Charlie Crossland, who's done a fantastic job here today. He's leader of the championship, and he's he's doing the best that he can to put himself in the best position possible to extend that lead, and that's what he'll be doing today. Mike Noble isn't realistically a challenger for the championship for Charlie Crossland, and he's going to do a really good job bringing that car home in second place. Only 5.5 minutes to go. Meanwhile, Valentin Barrier, well, he's got a tense 5.5 minutes left on his plate because he's got to try and keep this Aston Martin behind. Andy Boardman, he's going to go side by side. He's going to be slightly ahead into the fog. Yes, he's
just a little bit of a tap, and that is going to set Boardman back. It was so close. He was so close to making that move stick, but just not quite there. And that's going to make Boardman have to make all that space up again. It looks like maybe Gergo Panker can maybe hold Valentin up just a little bit. Maybe like the motor racing gods of the world will restore some balance. Boardman does not want to let that thing, does not want to let that slide. He'll be so late on the brakes. Panker flashing the lights in frustration. I mean, just a face full of Aston just came out of absolutely nowhere, but I can't tell.
I'm going to hear some rather strong words from Gergo Panker post-race, I imagine, about that dive from Andy Boardman. And, I mean, I can't blame it. That was from a mile back, but it just kind of shows you Andy Boardman doesn't want to get held up at this point in time. And I'm receiving information, by the way, that Jardier is apparently cutting it very, very close with his fuel for the remainder of this race. And how heartbreaking would that be if he runs out of fuel towards the end of this race? We'll have to keep an eye on that. If Jardier suddenly starts slowing down, then that might be something to look at. He's still looking good at this point in time. And his teammate, well, he's under pressure, to say the least. And currently thinking to himself, signing up for time. Maybe I have a good chance of a result. Oh, it's a mistake from Barrier. He goes too deep, and there goes Boardman. The number 69, the Aston Martin, says thank you very much. Couldn't get it done on the previous lap, but he'll get it nice and easy on that one. Oh, Valentin Barrier and Martin Lawrence
close
into the loop. Martin Lawrence probably won't appreciate that too much. And gives a little flash of the lights as well to tell Valentin Barrier he's not too happy. This is just too late on the brakes from Valentin Barrier. He's just looking behind him, too focused on Boardman, late on the brakes. Has to take to the gravel. Boardman says thank you very much, I'll go on through. And here Boardman, he goes on the inside of Martin Lawrence. He wants to get through as quick as possible. And Martin Lawrence maybe didn't expect Valentin Barrier to try and follow Andy Boardman through there.
No, again, a flash of frustration. Again, cannot say there's any blame there whatsoever, and it's looking very, very, very close for the Jardier community team. Doing a little bit of snooping, actually, Ryan. It looks like, obviously, because Jardier is obviously streaming at the moment, it looks like he does actually have 3 laps of fuel remaining. So, it's right, he is cutting it very, very close. I mean, with 3 minutes, I think he's going to make it to the end, but we will have to see.
We will have to see. And, James Parker's got back past Thiago Lima at some point in time. Because, the little orange Ginetta was ahead of the BMW the last time we saw them, and this is for fifth place, in the GT.
And another development I've just noticed, sorry for interrupting again, Ryan, Barrier with the drive-through penalty.
Valentin Barrier, drive-through penalty. Now, I didn't see that message come up. I'm checking the penalty reports channel. I have nothing from the stewards.
I wonder
if
it was track limits.
It might be track limits, to be fair. It is possible to pick them up around here, and it is track limits. I've just had that confirmed to me. So it was not a live steward-enforced penalty. That's track limits for Valentin Barrier, and a good result. 7th place on debut here tonight. Unfortunate for Valentin Barrier. That's going to cost him a load of time. Guglia, Svenchek, and Robot, they're all going to be looking forward to that, although I think only Guglia is close enough
He definitely won't be now. He has just actually
Oh,
looped it. Sadly, going onto the going not onto the main straight, going down towards the Fokker TSs, and that is not what he wanted at all. Svenchek looks like Barry. I think Svenchek is a lap down, sorry, so that is not a for position, but I don't think he's going to be close, even with the drive-through. But that's still, again, there's just so much triumph and heartbreak, and how much triumph and heartbreak can you fit into an hour and a half? Which we should have just titled this stream, really.
well, I did say right before the race, there are stories yet to be written throughout the course of this 90-minute race. And we've had quite a few stories written, some of them dramatic, some of them not so much, some of them heartbreaking. And, well, it's not over yet. Andy Boardman, he got his way past Valentin Barrier, and he still has the chance for a top 5 finish here, because he's got Cody Pride just ahead of him. 10 seconds left on the clock. This is going to be the final lap of the race. Milton Steele-Vason comes through the Fokker TSs. He's just about to finish up here as these guys come on to the final lap. But he is your race leader. Didn't qualify on the front row of the grid. But I tell you what, he's done an absolutely fantastic job. Got past George Boothby early on. Undercut Leo Hirvonen in the pit stops and has just commanded the race from a GT3 perspective. Milton Steele-Vason, the gap between him and Boothby will narrow with 3 races left, 2 rounds to go. Steele-Vason wins the 90 minutes of Donington Park. And it's a well-deserved win as well. Jardier looks like he will be safe on fuel. He'll come over in 2nd place. And George Boothby, the championship leader, he'll retain the championship lead with his top 3 finish. But we look backwards. Here comes Cody Pride and Andy Boardman into the Fokker Yeses. Ooh! Boardman so close on the back of Cody Pride coming down towards the Melbourne loop. He's got 2 chances to make an overtake here. He's going to be late on the brakes in towards the loop. Is he going to have a look at a switchback here? Try to have a bit of a look. And he's got a bit of a grunt there on the BMW, but the M6 with the raw power. Here he comes late on the brakes. He's going to try and have to go around the outside. It's well defended. And Cody Pride will hang on. Flash of the lights from Boardman. It's Rupert 4th, Pride 5th, Boardman 6th. Valentin Barrier comes home in 7th. Guglia 8th. Svenchek 9th, and Hobart will be 10th. And Mike Noble wraps up another win in GT4. It's 2 wins at Donington Park for the little Alpine. There goes Charlie Crossland.
Robot nowhere to go, really just about avoids that car market cut off as well. Absolute chaos.
Well, absolutely fantastic. And Martin Lawrence will come home in 4th place. James Parker will hold on for 5th. And we'll get the full standings for you up here. So there it is. Confirmation then that Steele-Vason is your winner. 9 seconds in the end from Jardier. And then George Boothby in 3rd place. Felix Rupp at 4th. Cody Pride rounding out the top 5. Boardman, Barrier, Guglia, Svenchek, and Crowbar in the top 10. And unfortunately for Leo Hirvonen, 6 laps from the end, a retirement coming through for the NSX after he'd done so well. But just poor strategy on tyres compromised him. Then in the GT4s, my word, has it been an adventure. Mike Noble, well, he started at the front and he finishes at the front. Charlie Crossland in 2nd, though, will extend his championship lead. Cormac Ryan Meenan on the podium. Martin Lawrence and James Parker rounding out the top 5. Thiago Lima, Gergo Panka, Mikhail Sundstrom, Matt Samuel, Alan Garland, and Andre Felix, your finishers in GT4. Obviously, William Stephenson and Killian Ryan Meenan, unfortunately, did not make it to the end of the race. Well, if you enjoyed the action on show here tonight, you can hit that like and subscribe button. It helps us a lot around here at Racing Club International. It lets us know that we're doing a great job. And, of course, the YouTube algorithm loves it as well. It loves to crunch those numbers. And, of course, we love to feed it as many numbers as we can. We'll be feeding it plenty of numbers over the course of this week. No numbers to feed it tomorrow, though. On Tuesday, it's our day off. And we all get to have a little bit of a relax before we get a relentless next set of days. On Wednesday, the Diamond Drive Cup continues, round 3 at Imola. It's been a fantastic series in the first 2 rounds of the championship so far. Can Enel Rose extend her lead in the championship? We'll have to find out. Then on Thursday, no broadcast unfortunately, but the GT4 exclusive championship returns. And that one will be heading out to Alton Park, another British GT circuit on the calendar for another championship. That's going to be exciting. I'll be racing in that myself. Like I said, unfortunately, no live stream for that one. We just unfortunately don't have the staff on Thursday evenings available. But on Friday, the GT3 World Championship returns. Myself and Jesse Lee in the box for 2 30-minute races at Misano. I've heard that there's rumours of dry weather or rain could be likely as well. And then on Saturday, there's no Night Owl this Saturday. It takes a break because we have the 3 hours of Donington Park, part of round 3 of the Endurance World Tour Championship. I'll be commentating live on that one. That's going to be so exciting to bring to you. 3 hours of action. We've had 90 minutes here. And, well, the 3 hour will be starting in the dark, and it will be coming up to sunlight around the halfway point of the race. So exciting to get that race underway on the weekend. And, of course, we return on Monday for round 5 of the British GT Championship. We'll be at Snetterton for 2 30-minute sprint races. And I think some of these drivers will be hoping it will be a bit drier than this. So, thank you for joining us here this evening. Big thanks to our stewarding team who have done a fantastic job this race, looking through incidents. Not too many incidents to judge penalties on. It's been very good, very well behaved from most people. Thank you to everyone for tuning into the stream tonight. We really do appreciate it. We hope you've enjoyed the stream. Like we said, leave a like and subscribe if you feel we've earned it. And, of course, we look forward to seeing you guys back on Wednesday for the Diamond Drive Cup. But before that, enjoy the rest of your evening.